Wyoming Territory, October 1877. The wind carried ash through the stillness as Lachlan Everett rode into the clearing, his horse kicking up soot from the charred earth. He tugged the reins, slowing the gelding at the sight of the blackened cabin. Smoke still curled from the ruins, faint now, a ghost of what it had been. He scanned the wreckage, eyes sharp. Then he saw her. She crouched in the corner of what used to be the front room, arms wrapped around her knees, bare feet dusted in ash. Her dress was torn at the hem, one sleeve gone, her skin streaked with soot. Her eyes wide, glassy, green locked on him. Lachlan dismounted slowly, hands open, voice low. "I will not hurt you, ma'am." She did not speak. She only stared, chest rising and falling like she had run miles through fire. He stepped closer, the boards creaking under his boots. "Are you hurt?" She flinched when he knelt. Her fingers dug into her arms. "I am Lachlan Everett. I live east of here, near Laramie. I have a wagon, food, clean water." He hesitated. "You do not need to talk. But you cannot stay here." Still, she said nothing. But after a long moment, she nodded once. Just once. He offered her his coat. She did not take it, but she let him drape it over her shoulders. She moved like someone who had learned to expect pain. Lachlan took his time helping her onto the horse. She was light, too light. And when his arm wrapped around her to steady her, she did not pull away, just trembled like a leaf. They rode in silence. By the time they reached his small ranch tucked in a narrow valley, dusk had fallen. He helped her down gently and led her inside the cabin. It smelled of cedar and old coffee. There was a fire already going. "You can take the bed," he said. "I will sleep in the barn." She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "I do not want to be alone." He held her gaze. "Then I will take the floor. You will be safe." She nodded again. Her name came later when the light was low and the shadows long. "Penelope," she said. "Penelope Greer." She did not say what happened that night in the cabin, but Lachlan already knew. The fire had not been an accident. He could see it in her silence, in the way she flinched when a log cracked in the hearth. He did not press her. The next days passed gently. She barely spoke, ate little, and stuck close to the porch like the trees at the edge of the yard might come alive. But she watched him. Watched the way he moved, quiet and steady. The way he spoke to his horses like they mattered. The way he never stepped too close to her, even when she looked like she might fall over. On the fourth day, she helped him bring in firewood. She did not say a word, but she carried the logs and stacked them neatly. That night, she ate a full bowl of stew. A week later, she asked about his family. "I had a brother," he said, setting down his tin cup. "He died in the war." She sat across from him, legs tucked under her. "That is why you are alone?" "I reckon I just never found someone who looked at me like I mattered." She looked up at him then. Really looked. "I do not have anywhere else to go," she said. "You do now," he said, simple as that. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out into the dark. Her voice was small. "I did not think I would survive." He stood too, not touching her but close enough to share the warmth from the fire. "You did. And now you are here." Penelope did not cry, but her hands trembled. He reached out, slow, and covered her fingers with his. "I want to help you," he said. "I do not want pity. This is not pity. It is care." She looked at their joined hands, then up at him. Her chin lifted slightly. "I do not know how to be normal again." "You do not need to. Just be here." She took a breath. "Why are you doing this?" Lachlan's voice was quiet. "Because when I saw you in that cabin, something in me said I could not ride away." The next morning, she braided her hair for the first time. By the end of the second week, she was walking to the barn on her own, feeding the chickens, brushing the old mare that nipped at her sleeves. Lachlan watched her grow steadier, watched her laugh once when the rooster chased her. And one evening, as the sun painted the hills in gold, she sat beside him on the porch and said, "You saved me." He looked at her, the way her hair caught the light, the faint scar on her jaw, the way her eyes no longer looked over her shoulder. "I just found you," he said. "You did the rest." She turned toward him. You gave me your home. He hesitated. Then, steady and sure, he added, and I will give you my name if you want it. Penelope's eyes filled, but she smiled. Why? Because I want to be the man who stands beside you. I want to build a life that makes you feel safe. And because I am falling in love with you. She reached for his hand, held it tight. I never thought I would feel love again. You are allowed to, he said softly. You deserve it. And she leaned into him, resting her head against his shoulder, letting herself believe it. The frost came early that year. By the time the cottonwoods along the creek wore their gold thin, Penelope had traded her threadbare shoes for a pair Lachlan found wrapped in oilcloth in his brother's old chest. They were too wide, but she stuffed them with wool and wore them proudly. She stood at the stove, sleeves rolled, brow furrowed as she watched the kettle hiss. I've never cooked on a flat iron stove before, she said, nudging a pan with the edge of a spoon. My father swore by open flame. Lachlan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You're doing better than I did my first winter. I near burned the place down boiling beans. She glanced back at him, lips twitching. Is that why the hearth is patched with brick instead of stone? He tipped his head. That'd be the very reason. The eggs came out soft, the potatoes crisp at the edges. She didn't sit until he did. It was still like that deference stitched into her movements, but she no longer flinched when he reached for the salt or stood behind her to lift something heavy. I read one of the books you keep beside the bed, she said after a few bites. The one with the man who writes letters from the war. He misses his mother. Lachlan set down his fork. That was my brother's favorite. He left notes in the margins, little thoughts. She nodded. I found one. Said, the worst part of dying is not knowing how the wheat came in. He looked down at his plate. He planted a field the spring he left. Penelope reached across the table, fingertips grazing his knuckles. He sounds like someone who loved simple things. He did. Lachlan turned his hand, let hers rest in his palm. Had a way with horses, too. They followed him like dogs. She traced the edge of his thumb. I'm not sure what I'm good at anymore. You carry quiet like it's armor, he said. And still you sit here with me. That's something. Her throat moved as she swallowed. I remember things strange, out of order. I'll be feeding the hens, and suddenly I hear the boards crack behind me like they did that night. You don't need to explain. I want to, she said, voice low. I want to tell you everything. But it's like the words are buried under snow. He didn't press her. He only held her hand a little tighter. That afternoon, she walked the ridge above the pasture while Lachlan repaired a loose rail on the corral. She came back windblown, cheeks flushed, a single sprig of sage in her hand. I saw elk trail above the bluff, she said, stepping into the barn where he was oiling tack. They moved like they owned the world. They do up there. She held out the sage. Smells like the wind after rain. He took it gently. You're learning the land. I want to know it, she said. There's comfort in things that don't need words. He tucked the sage into a crack between the boards. You're part of it now. That night, she lit the lamp without being asked and folded the blankets for the barn bed, even though he hadn't used it in days. They'd fallen into a quiet rhythm, he sleeping on one side of the room, she on the other, the space between them filled with the soft weight of trust. But she didn't lie down. She stood by the fire, hands clasped. I used to think love was loud, she said. Lachlan looked up from where he was unlacing his boots. All grand gestures, promises shouted from wagons. Her eyes met his. But it's not, is it? No, he said. It's sitting with someone when the fire burns low, letting them be who they are. She crossed the room, knelt beside him. I'm not afraid of you. You don't have to be. I think I'd like to stay in this house, she whispered. Not just for winter. He reached out, touched her cheek, rough thumb against soft skin. You already belong here. I want to know what it feels like, she said, voice trembling. To be chosen, not pitted. Lachlan's hand fell to her shoulder. Penelope, I didn't offer you my name out of sympathy. I offered it because I see the life we could build. You and me. No noise, no show. Just steady days. She leaned forward, forehead resting against his. Then I accept. His arms came around her, slow and sure, and she let herself settle into the space where his heart beat strong. In that moment, there was no past, no burned cabin. Only the warmth of the room, the hush of wind beyond the walls, and the quiet beginning of something whole. Snow came in a hush, laying white across the valley and softening the sound of every footstep. The cottonwoods stood bare now, their branches etched black against a sky the color of pewter. Penelope stood at the barn's threshold, brushing her palms clean of grain dust, watching as Lachlan led the roan gelding from the far paddock. The horse's breath steamed in the cold, and so did his. "You keep to a rhythm," she said when he reached her. He paused, scratching behind the gelding's ear. "Animals expect it." "I think I do too," she murmured. Lachlan looked at her, then down at the worn gloves in her hand. "You're not wearing those out just to be polite, are you?" "One finger's gone stiff," she admitted, holding them out. He took them, turning the fabric over. "I'll mend them tonight. Stitches coming loose here. I used to sew better," she said. "But my hands, they aren't steady yet." "They will be," he said, folding the gloves under his arm. "You just keep using them." She followed him toward the shed, stepping carefully over the frozen ruts. Inside, he set to checking the harness straps while she leaned against the wall, watching the way he worked without wasting emotion. "Did you always want this life?" she asked. He didn't look up. "No. When I was younger, I wanted to see San Francisco. Thought I'd be a carpenter. Build houses that touched the sky." "What changed?" "My brother didn't come home," he said simply. "And the land needed someone." She nodded once, settling in the quiet that followed. Later, they sat at the kitchen table, the lamp throwing long shadows on the walls. Penelope pulled her braid loose, letting the strands fall over her shoulders. The kettle whistled low, and she poured 2 cups without asking. "I've been thinking about spring," she said, sliding a cup toward him. Lachlan looked over the rim. "Too early for planting." "Not for planning," she said. "This land's got more in it than just grass and chickens." He tilted his head. "What are you thinking?" "Soap," she said, a flicker of hope in her voice. "I used to make it with my mother. We sold it to travelers passing through. I remember the recipe. Tallow, lye, lavender if we had it." He sat back, considering. "You want to start a trade?" "I want to do something with what's left of me," she said. "Something that doesn't just take from the land but gives back." Lachlan's gaze didn't waver. "If you want it, you'll have it. I'll build you a shed for curing and shelves for storage." Her fingers curled around the warm tin cup. "I don't want to be idle." "I can't be." "You're not," he said. "But if this gives you purpose, then we'll make it happen." Her eyes didn't shine, but they held something steadier than before. "I'd like to use my mother's name for it. Greer Soapworks. You'd make her proud." Penelope looked down, then up again. She used to hum when she stirred the pot. "No words, just a tune. I can still hear it sometimes when the wind's right." He reached for her hand across the table, not asking permission. She didn't pull away. "You hum it when you're ready," he said, "and I'll be there to hear it." They sat a while in the warm hush of the room, fire popping in the stove, the lamp flickering low. Outside, the wind moved through the pines, gentle as breath. Lachlan spoke again, quiet. "You ever wonder what it would have looked like if none of it had happened?" She shook her head. "No, because if it hadn't, I'd never have come here." He looked at her, surprised. "I don't want to forget what I lost," she said. "But I'm not afraid to build new things now. Not with you." He took a breath, slow. "Then let's start with that soap shed." She smiled, the kind that didn't need to be wide to be full. "And maybe a goat, if we can manage one come spring." He grinned, soft and lopsided. "You drive a hard bargain." Penelope reached across the table, laid her other hand over his. "You already gave me everything I didn't know how to ask for." Lachlan didn't speak, just turned her hand over and kissed the inside of her wrist light, reverent as if he knew exactly what it had cost her to say that. The snow fell steady outside, blanketing their world in silence, but inside the cabin, the future was beginning to take shape, slow and certain, like the rise of sun behind the ridge. The old shed behind the barn had once held salt blocks and broken tack. Its roof sagged in the middle and the latch rusted through, but Lachlan cleared it out before the first thaw. By early March, the walls had been braced, shelves built, and the wide window frame patched with fresh glass panes brought in from Laramie by wagon. Penelope stood in the doorway, apron tied tight, sleeves rolled past her elbows. A wooden barrel steamed beside her, curls of lye soap rising as she stirred slow, deep circles with a pine paddle. "I forgot how strong it smells," she said, her nose wrinkling. Lachlan leaned his shoulder against the doorframe. "That's why I fixed the window first." She gave a quiet nod, then dipped her hand into the cool rinse basin beside her. "I had a memory this morning. Not a bad one. I remembered my father showing me how to tell lye strength with a feather. If it floats, it's right. You try it." She held up a damp feather found beneath the eaves. It floated. He smiled but didn't comment on it. Instead, he folded his arms and glanced around. "You'll need somewhere to store the finished bars." "I was thinking the back wall. I can stack drying racks and leave the door cracked for airflow. I'll saw more boards this week." She looked up from the paddle. "I can help with that. You'll get blisters. I'll wear gloves." He studied her a moment. "You want to build every piece of this with your own hands, don't you?" "I do." Lachlan stepped inside and lifted one of the wooden molds she'd made from scraps. "Then I'll follow your lead." Later, as the light shifted to late afternoon and shadows stretched long across the pasture, Penelope sat on the porch steps, a tin cup of cooled tea in her hands. Lachlan joined her, his hat resting between his knees. "Mrs. Kinnard stopped by while you were walking the ridge this morning," he said. Penelope glanced over. "What did she need?" "She brought a bundle of wool. Said she'd heard you were starting soap and wanted to trade when you were ready." Penelope traced the rim of her cup. "I didn't think anyone knew yet. I told her you were working quiet but serious." "And she believed you?" "She said the way you walked told her enough." Penelope looked out toward the hills where snow still clung to the northern slopes. "I'm not sure I know how to be part of a town again." "You don't have to be part of all of it. Just the parts you choose." "Is that what you do?" "I go to the supply post. I help when someone's wagon breaks. But I sleep better here." She took another sip, then set the cup down beside her. "What was your brother's name?" "Ewan." "What was he like?" "He had a way of making everything feel like it might turn out right, even when it didn't. He sounds like someone who could have helped people." "He did. He taught school for a while before the war. Said it was the first thing he ever did that made him feel useful." Penelope rested her chin on her knees. "I used to wonder if I'd ever feel useful again." "You already are." She turned her head toward him. "Not just to the land. To you. You keep me steady," Lachlan said. "Even on the days when nothing looks different. I didn't think I had that in me anymore." "You do. You show it in ways you don't even notice." She reached over and touched his wrist, fingers light. "Do you ever wonder if we would have found each other without all that fire?" "I don't know. But I know I wouldn't trade what we have now, not for anything." Penelope drew in a breath and let it out slow. "I want to marry you before the spring flowers come." Lachlan blinked, then set his hat down. "You sure?" "I'm sure." He didn't reach for her, not yet. "It doesn't have to be soon. You can take all the time you need." "I've had time," she said. "And every day inside this house, every step I've taken on this land, it's already been a kind of home. I want to make it permanent." He nodded once, then stood and offered her his hand. She took it and let him pull her to her feet. He rested his forehead lightly against hers. "We'll ask Reverend Clark next time he comes down from Elk Hollow," he said. She smiled, quiet and sure. "I'll sew my own dress. Something simple. We'll hang spruce branches around the porch," he said. "And you can carry whatever's blooming." She looked toward the pasture again. "I think the crocus will be first. Then crocus it'll be." They stood there a while longer, hands linked, the last of the sun sinking behind the ridge. Inside the house, the fire warmed the walls that had held them through winter. Outside, the land they tended together waited for its next season. The land softened in April, thaw water dragging ribbons through the pasture, and Penelope's soap shed filled with rows of pale bars set out to cure on drying shelves. The scent of lavender and tallow lingered in the air, faint but clean. She wore her shawl pinned at the neck with a carved bone brooch Lachlan had found tucked in his brother's old trunk, the ivory worn smooth with years. A week before the Reverend was set to arrive, Penelope sat beside the hearth, a swatch of muslin spread across her knees. Her needle moved with care, stitching a narrow hem. She'd chosen the fabric from Mrs. Kinnard's trade pile, simple, soft, the color of milk. Lachlan worked at the table behind her, shaping the cedar box he meant to give her as a wedding gift. "You ever think about what you want after this?" she asked, not looking up. "After the wedding? After spring? After the soap cells? After we put the garden in?" Lachlan paused, knife stilling against the wood. "I'd like to build another room. Something with windows facing the creek." She smiled faintly. "What for?" "For days when the wind's bad, and you want sunlight without the cold." She set down the muslin. "That sounds like a room for children." He turned slowly. "Would you want that?" "I would," she said. "Maybe not right away, but someday." He nodded. "Then we'll build the room." The morning of the wedding came clear and still. The crocus bloomed in small clusters along the southern slope, and Penelope gathered them with chilled fingers, their purple petals cupped tight against the wind. Lachlan waited by the gate, his coat brushed clean, the Reverend Clark seated beside him on the bench they dragged from the porch. Penelope wore her muslin dress tied with a length of linen ribbon dyed with walnut husks. Her hair was pinned at the nape of her neck, a single comb holding it back. She walked to Lachlan with steady steps, her hands empty but sure. Reverend Clark stood as she reached them. "You wish to speak your own vows?" Lachlan looked at her. "If she'll allow it." Penelope nodded once. Lachlan cleared his throat, voice low. "I don't promise ease. I don't promise clear skies or dry roads. But I promise I'll keep you warm, and I'll keep you safe. I'll help you build whatever you want to make. And I'll never walk away." Penelope folded her fingers into his. "I don't promise to forget, but I promise to keep moving forward. With you. I promise to share the good days and stay through the hard ones. And if we ever lose things again, we'll lose them together." Reverend Clark raised his hands. "Then by the witness of this land and each other, I name you husband and wife." Lachlan leaned down, kissed her not out of ceremony, but out of quiet certainty. She returned it without hesitation, her breath warm against his cheek. That night, they didn't sleep immediately. They sat in the new room Lachlan had finished just the day before, the window glass still bearing the marks of his hands. A fire crackled in the small iron stove, and outside, the wind moved the pine trees gently. Penelope rested her head against his shoulder. "I used to think the worst thing was being alone. And now I know the best thing is knowing you never will be again." He turned slightly, kissed her hair. "We'll plant the garden next week. Then you can teach me how to tell when beets are ready." She laughed into his collar. "You'll learn when you pull one too early and taste the dirt. I'll take your word on it." She tilted her face to him. "You know, when we first met, I didn't think I could ever feel safe again. I didn't think I'd ever share my home. And now I can't imagine it without you." They wrapped around each other then, not out of urgency, but belonging. When they finally slept, it was with hands linked, the weight of the past behind them, and the soft sound of wind through the eaves like a lullaby. Years passed gently. The soap sold well enough to trade for cloth and seed, and the room with the windows filled not only with sunlight, but with a cradle Lachlan built with his own hands. Their daughter came in the second spring, dark-haired and strong-lunged, and Penelope named her Clara after the woman who had once taught her the feather test for lie. They built a life the way they'd promised, slow, honest, and without pretense. They never sought more than what they needed, and they never feared the quiet. Penelope hummed sometimes now, not out of memory, but peace. Lachlan never asked her to explain it. He only listened. They grew old in that valley side by side. And when the wind rose each winter, it carried not ash, but the scent of lavender and wood smoke, and the sound of a woman's low song drifting through the trees, the sound of something not lost, but lasting.